It's one thing for the government to say, here's how we're going to run our country. We're going to have high taxes. Or the people say, we're going to have this culture. We're going to go in this direction. But you know what really bothers me is when countries say, the rest of you should all be like us. There's pushback around the world from countries that don't want to follow that Western narrative. More countries than ever are standing up and pushing back against it. And those are the kind of places that I think you want as Plan B, C, D, and beyond. But today we're going to talk about how the European Union is flexing its muscles and pushing its values in other countries regarding citizenship and what you need to know when getting your second citizenship. One of the things I've been talking about more over the last year is that the United States, at the turn of the century, had sanctioned about 8% of entities in the world. And that's now up to about 29% in less than a quarter of a century. And what I've told you numerous times now is, I don't know that there's 4 times as many bad guys, but perhaps 4 times more interest from a waning power. And you may not think it's a waning power because you're sitting in it or you're sitting in a place that's very culturally similar to it, but in the scope of the world, a waning power. And this is one of the early last clutches at power. And so the European Union, I've never seen as quite as bad as the US. Certainly if you live there, there's elements of nanny-state and busybodying, bureaucracy, and what have you. Somehow, some of those rules never impact, hey, airlines actually have like a real business class and not just a curtain in the same area. The regulations never benefit you in a place like the EU. But what the EU is trying to do with citizenship and your rights to have a second citizenship is trying to punish smaller countries that want to be more free around the world. They are taking a page out of the US playbook and saying, if you don't act like us, if you don't think like us, we're going to make your life miserable. And I'm talking about citizenship because you can look at the Caribbean, Albania, Georgia, and even places like El Salvador, where there are threats from the European Union. If you don't play ball with us, your citizens won't be able to visit. I'm going to tell you my thoughts on this, and you might actually be surprised. And so the first place to talk about is in the Caribbean, where 5 Eastern Caribbean countries, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, and my own personal country, St. Lucia, all have what are called citizenship by investment programs. You make a donation, they give you a passport. The process has been slowed down a little bit recently because the EU pushed to now have interviews. That was not something that I had to go through. I had to gather lots of documents and show I don't have a criminal record and I don't have all kinds of civil problems and I'm just overall an upstanding person. They ran it through some very sophisticated background check software, and they do, in some cases, enhanced due diligence and make sure the people who are getting their citizenship are good. Every once in a blue moon, you hear about some guy who was running some crypto scam, gets found out to have had a passport in one of these countries, but it wasn't known to the countries at the time. Nobody knew it. So generally speaking, the due diligence works pretty well. That's not good enough for the European Union. They don't like the concept that citizenship is for sale. Now, they perhaps should consult their former member, the United Kingdom, who, when these countries gained their independence back largely in the 1970s, it was, hey, you know what? Why don't you do our banking for us? And we can use you to take money from London and you'll do our offshore banking. And yeah, you set up offshore corporations. And then that fell out of vogue, and then they came, and these Caribbean countries got hit over the head with a stick and said, yeah, we don't like that anymore, stop doing that. And then the country said, okay, we have this asset, we have a passport, and we're small, peaceful countries, we don't bother anybody. If you live here, you pay taxes, although in 2 of the countries you don't, they're tax-free. And if you don't live here, you don't pay. And so for people who are part of this increasingly location-independent movement, they just want to be left alone and don't want to have a passport that gets them in trouble or causes them to be ridiculed or judged or kept out of certain opportunities or banks or whatever else. Hey, come and get our passport and we'll charge you money and we'll use that money to, unlike a big Western power, which goes to corrupt bureaucracies, we'll actually use it to build roads and schools and bridges and low-income housing and things we actually need, because our budgets are in like the hundreds of millions of dollars, not billions and trillions, but like literally the hundreds of millions of dollars. We can use the money. And now the European Union, which admits people from all places around the world, is saying, hey, you know what? For our national security, we don't like that you sell citizenship to rich people. Because if there's one thing the European Union hates, it's rich people. We all know that. How dare rich people be able to have options? The European Union wants to be basically the toll booth collector on the way for you to get citizenship. Hey, move to one of our high tax countries. And if we like you, then we'll give you a passport. But don't go over there to St. Lucia. We don't approve of that. And listen, there are some tax-friendly countries in Europe. We've helped our clients move to a number of them. And yes, some of them will allow you to get a passport. And yes, those passports are of higher value. European Union passports are what we'd call Tier A passports. Caribbean passports are what I would call Tier B passports. And there's 3 tiers, A, B, and C. And so if you want to move to Ireland, if you want to move to Italy, if you want to move, I guess those are maybe 2 of the best ones right now for tax-friendly and second citizenship, you can move and you can get citizenship in 5 to 10 years. If you are of some sort of Hispanic heritage, you can move to Spain for a couple of years and get citizenship there and take advantage of some of the tax incentives which don't last as long in Spain. So you could move to one of those countries, put in your time, if you like the lifestyle there, enjoy yourself, and get a passport. But for many people who don't have the time to do that, they want to stay in their home country. They're like me. For many years, I was nomadic. I don't put in 6 or 9 months in one place in a year. I just don't want to. Who is the European Union to say, hey, we don't want you to get that citizenship? We're going to impose various restrictions on your country. We're going to make life difficult for you. We're going to put in a bad word for you with other countries unless you cater to our demands. And so the Caribbean citizenship countries got together recently and said, okay, we'll double the price. I don't know how that makes keeping rich people out any easier that you doubled the price. I've been telling you for a long time the price will not stay as low as it was for a long time. People said, oh, no. How, well, here we are. The European Union convinced these countries to effectively double their prices. And so it now costs twice as much to insure yourself against places like the European Union and the United States. Because I think that Americans are subject to not only taxes on their worldwide income, there's ways to greatly reduce that, but there's still a regulatory burden. There's a lot of restrictions that come with being a U.S. citizen if you don't want to live in the United States. I think European Union countries won't get that bad, but they will do something at some point to make being an EU citizen abroad more difficult. And I think everyone wants a backup plan. The Caribbean has for a long time been one. Be a citizen of a peaceful country. We don't want criminals. But you know what? We don't have to agree with your views. And so people who have different views on how much they should be taxed or how much freedom they should have, the European Union wants the right to cut you off. Now, I hold residence permits, including EU countries. And I do think there's a relatively down-the-line approval process in the European Union, more so than the US. Like if someone's applying for a Schengen visa to come to Europe, I think it's basically check the boxes. Whereas the U.S. is much more judgy and subjective who they give visas to, certainly who they give residence permits and green cards to. So I don't think the EU is at the same level as a place like the U.S. But it is more judgy than a place like Singapore or Malaysia where it's just, hey, are you a criminal? No. Do you have typhoid? No. Okay, come on in. And so the European Union's threat has been that if the price didn't double, they would consider restricting access of people with these Caribbean passports to come to the Schengen area in Europe. That does not apply to Ireland or the UK, although perhaps they would follow suit. So basically the whole of the European Union, for the most part, would be off limits without getting a visa if these countries didn't go along with the plan. So they went along with the plan. It's now going to cost you more to get citizenship. But the EU is doing this in other places. Albania was warned if they go forward with the citizenship by investment plan, they would have their visa-free access to Europe canceled. Now in Georgia, the EU is warning if you go forward with the plan to restrict the EU's ability to sanction certain people, we may restrict your visa-free access. I have Georgians who work for me, and some of them say, yeah, we're very much opposed to what's being proposed. There are big protests going on in Georgia. We don't want this to come in. And so I get that. But quite frankly, what business is it of the European Union? Let the European Union sanction whoever they want. And if other countries want to have their own rules, why don't they get to do that? Why doesn't every country get to do what's best for itself? Why do we have to listen to the US and the European Union and other large bodies tell us what to do? And so I think the European Union certainly has the right to set whatever visa policy it wants. We've talked about how everyone is going to essentially lose visa-free access to Europe. Now they're saying in 2025 with what's called ETIAS, E-T-I-A-S, where you're going to have to fill out a form, kind of like ESTA in the US, the pre-clearance form. They do a background check on you before you come. Even as a tourist, if you're American, Australian, Canadian, anyone who has visa-free access to Europe, you're still going to be checked. So, visa-free travel in its entirety, if just show up, will be gone at some point in the near future. And they're doing that to keep out the bad actors. Okay, fine. It's a minor annoyance. You pay €7. Most people won't have any problems. They can do that. But here's my perspective. I don't think people should worry that much about this for a couple of reasons. Number one, you could always get a golden visa if you want to have the ability to live in Europe, the ability to go to Europe, but not the obligation to be there. Portugal may no longer be tax-friendly. They still have a golden visa. So does Greece. Italy has options. Spain's talking about getting rid of theirs, was never a huge fan of theirs anyway. There are other options where you make passive investments and you have the ability to live there, but not really the requirement, or at least not very much at all. You have digital nomad visas if you want to live there, but you don't want to make a financial investment. There are self-sufficient visas. If you have your own income, you can move there. There's plenty of ways to move to Europe. Some of them require you to be there for a certain amount of time. Others do not, depending on generally on how much you're willing to invest. And quite frankly, I think some of this is just bluster. Will they go through with all these things? I think it's a very bureaucratic process, and there'll be chances for these countries to redeem themselves again. If the Caribbean has not redeemed itself already, then there's a much deeper issue. And let's come to that. If Albania is going to be your second citizenship, which generally speaking, you'd have to either move to Albania or really impress the president of Albania, who can grant citizenship, or you'd have to have Albanian ancestry and get it through citizenship by descent. That's something we help our clients do, get citizenship by descent through their ancestry in various countries. So if Albania is going to be the citizenship that you get, I would get some other citizenship. I would want to have multiple citizenships. I don't think 2 is enough anymore. I don't think you have to be as intense as I am, but I think you want to have a couple. And that way, if Albania falls on the wrong side, you have the other one. And it's possible that the third one or the fourth one is one that you're working toward more slowly by living somewhere. Or you have a golden visa and the clock is ticking without you living somewhere. So there's many different ways to get citizenship. I would be working towards a couple and having a couple. I think that Europe will continue to be accessible precisely because they are judgy, but not to the point of what some of the English-speaking Western countries do. And I would exclude Ireland from that because they're very open-minded about people coming who set up businesses and what have you. But like the US and Canada, I mean, they're constantly pushing people away, making excuses, picking sides. I don't think that the European Union is that bad. If you're a criminal, I think, forget it. If you have a criminal record, I think it's gonna be tough. But I think Europe will continue to be accessible. It's more of a frustration if you had to get a visa. Again, have multiple passports, have a golden visa, have a digital nomad visa. There's plenty of ways to go about this precisely because the Schengen area of Europe is an open area. If you have a residence permit in Portugal, you can go to Spain and you can visit for some time. And so that's open in a way that really no other block of countries in the world is. But at a certain point, if things got so bad that these countries all said, okay, we won't sell citizenship by investment in Albania. Montenegro, there was some talk that they ended their program under similar pressure. And okay, Georgia, all right, fine, we're gonna do what you want. If that doesn't solve it, you realize they really just want everyone to be what they are. And I see that. You go to some of these Eastern European countries, they get money from the EU, and they say, oh, we're EU trading partners. And now it comes with requirements. And they're willing to do it for the money, but I am seeing some pushback on that. I've talked to you for years about the Balkan countries, think they push back on that. That's not a bad plan B to have. I think there comes a time when you might have to choose. I don't think that time is now, and I'm not entirely sure it's coming at all. But one of our speakers at Nomad Capitalist Live this year, I know they've said in the past, they like to keep all their options open. They never burn a bridge. They don't, renounce U.S. citizenship. They always add to their options, never remove. And I appreciate that. And I think having as many options as possible is good. Have multiple passports. Maybe one of them will get you into the European Union, or the golden visa does. But at some point, if some country or block of countries is going to be so abusive to say, we don't allow anyone to be different. If you're not exactly like us, if you don't fall in line, if you don't take our money and do what we say, then your citizens can't come. I think that says a lot more about them. And quite frankly, I've been to well over 100 countries. I've lived in a number of them. It's nice to visit Europe. Would your life end if you couldn't go to Rome? If you couldn't go shopping in Zurich? If you couldn't go to Paris? It's nice to have the option. I think you'll still have the option. I think we're many layers away from you just having no options. But at some point, there may be a time for choosing. I think the US is a bigger one to time for choosing. And by the way, even people who give up their citizenship, depending on what passport they have, there's plenty of them that go back and visit the US. We're far away from catastrophizing this. But just be aware when people say, oh, I don't want to get that Caribbean passport. What if this, and then this happens and I can't go to Europe? I don't see that as happening. But if it did, would you really want to go to a place that totally stands separate from your values when there are so many places that have come up and that are livable? I don't want to be a part of places that extort the world. And that's what you're seeing all these coups in Africa about. In part, it's get France out of here. We're tired of their influence on our currency. We're tired of what they're doing here. We want to run our own show. You can argue maybe they'll run it and they'll run it badly. Fine. But more countries are saying, let us do us and you do you. And we think that those countries are the bad ones. The former prime minister of Malaysia said, hey, you know what? Don't come and give us a lecture. You guys had a lot of development. Now it's our turn to develop. Leave us alone. We don't want to follow all your rules. And if the EU or anyone else is going to say, fine, then you can't come to our country. Maybe the answer is, okay. So have your multiple residence permits, have your multiple passports. I think you're going to be fine, but be aware of these places that are losing power. They are less relevant in the global stage. You may not see it or feel it because you're living in it, but on a global stage, the West has less power than at the turn of the century. They don't like that. It was never going to be pleasant as that power is lost. And so just keep in mind, if the next 6 or 7 layers are bad, which side do you want to be on? I won't judge you regardless of which side you are. Happy to help. We help clients get European Union citizenship all the time by descent, through Malta's program in 18 months, through others. I'm all for that. Great. Now you're part of the European Union. If you can afford it, that's probably something that I would do. I've said it before. If you can't afford it, or if you don't want to do that, understand there may come a time when you got to choose.